Thanks so much, Sarah McGhee, for that provocative closing, especially for a place like Hong Kong, where, if anything, people want to consume more, not less. What we'd like to do now is to call upon the experts that have been asked to attend to respond to these talks. I think we have started to fulfill the mandate of this discussion. We've heard about development and questions of international law, at least obliquely. We've heard about questions of human rights and of course, health and democracy. Let's talk more about these issues, and I think the experts in the room can have some provocative statements and questions. So, Bill Barron, please.
We haven't talked about values. And I think that while it's very important to talk about the health, basically we're talking about consequences. And we're talking about sort of what we want in terms of human rights and all of this. But as was made clear yesterday and to some extent today, without a change in values, we're not going to change the driving forces that are leading us to what seems to be an impossible future. So if there's someone on the panel who could just address the issue of values and how not only how, we kind of know how values should change, but can anyone comment on how a change in values might come about? We kind of know where we want to be, less materialistic and more egalitarian and also caring more for nature, for species other than ourselves. But how do we, anyone have any thoughts on how we get there?
Any of the panelists like to take that question?
Yes, thank you so much. It's indeed a very insightful issue. Indonesia indeed is a good example that how to transform itself from old value to a new value, the value of anti-human right and democracy, because there was a dichotomy in the past. There was in the mind of Indonesian majority that if you pronounce too much democracy means that you kill your development, because no development with, you see, democracy cannot hand in hand in that value. So that's why in preserving environment, we cannot misbehave to environment. We need to introduce environmental impact assessment side by side with human right impact assessment. In that approach, indeed, is a new transformation of values from, well, what we call inclusive approach, exclusive approach to inclusive approach, from closed system to open system, authoritarian system to democratic system, centralistic to decentralized system. This great transformation by Indonesia, but it's a long journey indeed. We don't know whether we could manage it constructively, or there should be many what we call tsunami democracy. We don't know that. So it's a long process, but change has been made with 3R, Professor William. One is immediate recovery with this new value, because the new value should be created, should be implemented, but we had left the old value. We need to immediately recover. Secondly is we need to continually make progressive reform in all dimensions of development, in education, in security, in whatever. And thirdly is to reconciliation. So look for Indonesia with great diversity, one island with over 300 local languages, and we have about 80,000 islands. So that's actually so strange that we become a one nation. We call it Indonesia. So this is a great values transformation. I thank you.
I'd just like to add something to this, and I wanted to talk about values, and I think that's really what's really missing in this debate. It's a question, it's a difference of values. It's not a difference of negotiating positions and numbers and timelines. It's actually a question of values and attitudes and worldviews. Between the people who are keen to make a change and people who are somewhat feel less urgently about it, or countries or sections within countries who want to arrive at a solution now as against those who say we can wait another 20 or 30 years. I think it's really a question of values. You are absolutely right. We have to be less consumptive. And I think that's a lesson that's not universally, it may be very crystal clear to you and me. It is unfortunately not that clear to the outside world, to policymakers, to the middle classes, to... Sorry? Just the opposite. So exactly. So I mean, I have never come across a politician who's actually stood in any country, whether it's in Europe or it's in the US or in India, that any democracy who has actually stood on a platform, he or she, saying that my platform is that we need to consume less. I've yet to come across a political party or a major significant political party which has actually crossed the threshold, or a political actor who has crossed and been entered into parliament, who's stood on that campaign. And so we need to consume less, but that message has to go out from the top. Number one. Number two, I think it has to go from the bottom up, and that starts with education. The solution to your question is, where do we begin? Education, education, education. It's going to take a generation, 30, 40, 50 years, but if we start now, maybe in 2050, we could perhaps have a totally different set of people discussing this issue in a with a different set of fervor and passion and a different set of solutions in their mind. So I think that's the second thing. Third thing is, I think we need to accept the fact there's too much, finger pointing in these kind of conclaves and these kind of forums that you did this, you are responsible, India, China, no, USA and Europe, you. I think we all have to stop vilifying individual actors and individual agents who have perhaps been more at the forefront of destroying nature. I think we all have a role. We are all bad people. There are no good guys in this. All of us coming for this conference, we have created a carbon footprint, no matter what sort of offsets you buy. And by the way, one of the provocative comments that I wanted to make, Lisa asked me, I think this cap and trade thing is a very elegant scam. I totally disagree with the gentleman who told us early in the morning about cap and trade and how wonderful, since the best thing since sliced bread it is. I think it's one of the most elegant scams. It's a redistribution of wealth from the elite of region A to the elite of region B. And even then it doesn't work. The trees may not even be planted, or in any case, they may have been planted in any case. So I mean, we can discuss for 5 days ad nauseum about the cap and trade. It's really worthy of greater scrutiny rather than just taking one gentleman at one session at his word that cap and trade is a resounding success. So let's accept fact that there's a lot of lazy, quick, instant punditry about climate change. Talking about CFL in a country like India where people don't even have light and electricity is somewhat misplaced. Talking about painting your roofs white to reflect the sun's energy in a country like India and China and Africa where half the people don't have proper homes is very misplaced. I mean, let's get a sense of perspective here, people. Let's not vilify each other. We're all to blame, India as much as America. But I think there's a lot of finger pointing, and I think that this chasm that we have, east versus west, north versus south, developed versus developing, Copenhagen was a shameless display of that.
Sarah, did you want to say something as well?
Well, I'd like to say I agree. I'm afraid I'm a bit cynical. I think the developing world has so many problems and issues to deal with that this is possibly lower down their list. The developed world should be taking a lead, but as you know, we don't value something until we lose it very often. And the developed world is, to a great extent, protected against the impacts that we're seeing. I don't know how can we get it across to people what we're losing, or will we only notice it when we've actually lost it and gone too far down the road? I tend to be a little bit cynical. I don't know what the mechanism would be to change the developed world's values, but I think that's where it needs to start.
I wonder if, Professor Chen, hold on. Oh.
Thank you. I want to respond to Sarah's question. Because she mentioned a big issue which I was very interested at is the climate change and human health. And I think finally I saw that and I heard about that. I think that's very important. Because we had very rich presentations discussing about how the climate change, the influence to all the sea levels, whatever, air, temperature, ecosystem, and so on. But I think we touched very little or not much on the human health issue. So I think that's a very important thing we really have to consider about. That's my first thing. And my second point is about, for looking at about climate change and human health, I think up to now, the scientists and of course the policymakers know very little about that. So what's the most serious consequences of the climate change? Whether, what kind, and how many, how much and how many, I think that's the second very important question. And for this, we really need to answer it as soon as possible. And we need to do a lot of research on that. My third point is considering about the human health effects and climate change. We have to consider the policy implications about that. We just discussed about the value. For instance, Sarah mentioned about the heat waves happened in Europe in 2003. I can tell you a small story in Shanghai. We also have a heat wave happened in 1998. The heat wave was pretty strong. And the people died during the heat wave period was 3 times higher than the what I call normal summer period in Shanghai. However, in 2003, we had another heat wave happen in Shanghai again. And the heat wave is almost exactly the same like the 1998. But the excess mortality of the people died due to the heat wave is only 40% higher than the normal range. It's still higher, but it's much lower than the 1998 one. Why is that? Because during these several years, Shanghai developed a lot. The air conditioner is much more than, in 2003, is much more than 1998. And the living area per capita increasing, and the green area in Shanghai also increased. So this is what I thought. The climate change, if we do anything in climate change, considering the value and considering the environmental consequence, it will directly lead to a human health benefits. And these human health benefits could directly translate it into whatever the cost-benefit evaluation. Thank you.